Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. What is up, plant people? Our cotyledons, our true,
Greetings,
well, at this
greetings.
point, yeah, they're true leaves out
True
there.
leaves at
True
this
leaf
point, hopefully.
True
listeners. Been with us since the beginning, as if we've been here that long. But
Working on many nodes.
many notes.
Mini nodes. Speaking of true leaves, my tomato plants are very small right now. They're just not getting true leaves. I'm a little worried that I started late this year.
No, remember what we said, right? It's better to have them
late
too late
than early.
So,
I know, and that's what I was thinking. But I'm worried because my neighbor, I'm looking over the fence, and his tomato plants are bigger than mine, and I'm not happy about it. But they got stunted with our last frost. Not that I'm celebrating his misfortune. I'm just saying, Tim, listen, your tomatoes are a
that's what
bit
he's
yellow
saying.
now.
Tim is saying,
Maybe he's on TEDs, tomato enhancing
be.
drugs. Welcome to my TED Talk.
He is. I mean, there's a 9-step program for planting your garden too early.
Yeah, he's juicing.
Step 1, listen to Ray.
Juicing, and it's not after they're picked.
Which
Before.
That's exactly right.
That reminds me of somehow we were talking about this a little Hort agent group chat, and you all are plant people too. It's like my entire job is to answer questions that people have about their plants, right? And how to do things better, what's wrong with it, how to deal with this insect. And yet when I get home and I'm no longer like officially, an agent for the night, it's like all that knowledge somehow drops out of my brain. I'll be like, I don't know what to do. What do? I need to call somebody. And like, I'm the one I would call. So I don't understand what happens to the brain once you kind of leave this office. Must be what it is.
Give it away now.
I need to call my extension agent. My extension agent is Jessica, who we've had on the podcast before, and she calls me about stuff sometimes too. So it's like, what is it about that knowledge? I don't know if anybody else
protocol,
out there.
Alexis. Don't think. Call your
follow
agent.
the plan. Follow the plan.
Don't apply any critical perspective of your own. I cannot emphasize that enough. Just call your
zero
agent.
research on your own.
Yes.
Call
her
your
up
agent
and say, "What do I spray on this?"
Yeah.
How do I save my tree? It's a stump.
Here's the list of all the things I already sprayed.
Here's a picture of a dead plant. What happened?
I poured diesel fuel on it. Is that not like kosher, or what are we doing? But anyways, let's get to the root, so to speak, what we're talking about today. And I'm going to ask you each this question. What is your favorite cucurbit?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, I would.
Well,
I'm going to.
You go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I was going to say the golden retriever of cucurbits, which is summer squash, just yellow, no weird colors,
just yellow.
Just the golden retriever of cucurbits is summer squash.
That's an accurate
it's versatile,
representation.
And it takes on the
whatever flavor you put
of
to
whatever brown sugar that I
and
put
it's
on
golden.
It, or whatever. It is golden, literally. Yeah, yeah. I had that. I was ready for that. I mean, I like it.
No big deal. I was ready. Brett?
I was ready for that.
Well, I would say my favorite cucurbit is probably it was to eat it. Is this the
just your favorite cucurbit? I gave no stipulations.
To eat it. For me, it's to eat it.
Stipulation is must be edible.
I like where this is going. I like it.
I would say probably cantaloupe.
Oh,
ooh, yeah.
Because and I'll put a caveat on that. There is a lot of bad cantaloupe out there. But good cantaloupe is the texture of it. It's like this weird, almost creamy, firm, but
almost
soft.
like ice cream. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the best. And the best, I'll give him a shout out. Former extension specialist. He works with the greenhouses now. Shubin Saha when I worked at the South Farm, grew some melons that were the best cantaloupe I have ever had before or since. And it changed my whole vibe on cantaloupe. I would say my favorite cucurbit starts with a joke, which is why did the watermelons get married?
Why?
Because they cantaloupe.
Right.
I thought you were going muskmelon, but I didn't know how you were going to fit that in.
I'll give you another cucurbit joke.
Okay.
How do you fix a cracked pumpkin? With a pumpkin patch.
Oh my god!
Stop.
Yeah.
I
Stop.
feel like we peaked out
Good.
early on this. We
Right?
peaked
Like, what is
early.
even there more to say on this episode?
Nothing. We
So
can
I'm
add
hoping to
nothing to
develop a
this.
few more cucurbits as a result of
Ooh,
this podcast.
yes.
Pulled that one
Solid.
out. Proud of you.
Yeah.
Proud of you for that.
Once, I mean,
Josh,
he's
what
just
about
getting
you?
warmed up.
Since it's talked so much about food, I gotta give a shout out to the loofah, for scrub a dub
Okay.
dub.
Yes, loofah.
Look at you not going the route of food. I'm really shocked and surprised by
Well,
that.
I use
Turned
that
over
to
a new
clean up
leaf.
after I eat because there needs to be a lot of scrubbing. Like if I eat a sandwich, it's just I need to take a shower.
Josh, I love that you called this out. And just so we're clear, this is something I did not know, it wasn't common knowledge that you're talking about a loofah, like the thing that we use to scrub ourselves, exfoliate, OG, or, natural exfoliating thing. It
Mhm.
grows like inside of a gourd-like structure.
Not in
Yes.
the
And
ocean.
then is dried out. It's not a sea
It's not a
cucumber or some
sponge,
other.
right.
Yeah, it's right closer to a regular cucumber than a sea cucumber.
Mhm.
There we
Yeah.
go.
We grew them on the first farm that I worked on, coastal Georgia, and we took them home and bathed with them. It works, people.
It's good for cleaning your dishes and stuff too. So
Yeah, we
and
had
then
them like all over the house.
throw it in your compost when you're done, when it's getting weird and you got new ones. So
Do you guys remember what was the craze a few years ago? The apple gourds. It seems like I don't know what made me think about this. We're
Apple
talking about
gourds.
vining crops, but
Apple
everybody
bottom
was
gourds
growing like
and
the apple gourds, and they really look like an apple. And when you painted them up red, they
Yeah.
were amazing. Were you guys around for that? Like
I remember
Might
everybody
have
hearing
was
been
about
growing
that.
apple
before my
gourds.
time. Are you talking like
Could have been
We're talking like
1910s?
early
right.
1800s. Yeah.
I do remember that, Ray.
The Robinson, I think it was at the Robinson Research Center. There, they had some trials of them, and I thought, oh yeah, another gimmick. But I saw them painted up later. Amazing. They look like apple gourd. So it's always interesting to me that, speaking of cucurbits, the wide variety of plants that are included in there, vining, shrub
Mhm.
types. Some of them are 40 days, some of them are like 70, 80-day plants, but there's such a wide variety of plants
Well, and
that
there's a
we can
lot
talk
of
about.
that reminds me of like how there's a lot of grafting that can go on there,
Yes,
Mhm.
like
absolutely.
across
Yeah.
these species. And I remember a grad student was telling me about like I think they were grafting like cucumber rootstock with like some kind of melon, and I was like,
Mhm.
"What do you
Mm.
get?" And it's like you get this melon, but it tastes like a cucumber, and I was like, "Well, do you want to do that?" But
Ruined it.
What would be the motivation again there? Yeah,
I was like, "Wow, that's
exactly.
neat. No, thank you."
Pass.
No.
What's
Just
your
'cause you
favorite,
can
Alexis?
doesn't
Amazing.
mean you should. So
Alexis, did you say what your favorite was already?
no, but I will tell you about
okay.
them.
Them.
I
Okay.
have a love obsession with little tiny gourds, just little
Mhm.
tiny. The weirder looking, the better. I want
Like the
them to
colorful
look
ones?
like there's a kind I have, and I like them because you never really know what you're gonna get. They're called gremlins, gremlin
Cool.
gourds.
Oh,
Mixed
And
batches.
they're
Yeah.
little, like about the size of like a softball, depending.
Yeah.
They're all different shapes and all different colors, and they're just every single one is unique. And I think they are the cutest little things. And when I see them out there, I'm just like, look at the little gourds, and they are so precious. And you know what I've done with them every year I've grown them, which is it's only been 2 years, but I only had space for them for 2 years.
You
Is I
put
give them
faces
this.
on them and talk to them.
Yes.
Listen,
Wilson.
what I do with my private time is none of your business.
Do not judge her, lest she
No, I
invoke a
I
wrath.
give them away. Like I just
Mm.
love because everybody is by the time gourds are ready, it's like the beginning of fall, and people want to
Mhm.
decorate their front porch or their with their gourds. They can put them like inside in a bowl on their table if they're into that. I don't really decorate. That's not who I
Mhm.
am as a person. I get my Christmas tree out on Christmas Eve if I remember. But I freaking love giving these little gourds away because people are so excited and they can just put them anywhere, and they're so cute, and they're white and they're green and they're
They
yellow.
the kind that you can get with like the little craft bell of straw, like the 10-inch craft bell, and they're like in like the scale is proper for that.
Yeah,
Like
but I
I've
feel
seen
like
people do
mine are
that.
more weird.
Are they?
Like the ones I
Oh,
grow are
weirder.
funky.
Okay.
I don't know if
Okay.
it's on purpose, but they look like little aliens, and they're just so cute.
Yeah, I'm looking those up. There's apparently a cultivar of gremlin gourd called Super Freak, and I'm guessing that's one that you probably have
Super
ordered.
freak, super
Wow.
freak. She's super freaky. And I found, so, if they fall, if you're, let's say you have a car and you put down the seats in your car because you need to be able to haul a bunch of things, and maybe a gourd falls down below there and lives its life for roughly 6 months. It's not
Okay.
going to rot, and I feel like that's something that
Mm.
zucchini and cucumber cannot say.
I
So
once had a cucumber spend. It didn't let go 6 months. It was discovered,
wow,
but
judgy.
it went a while. Well, no. I don't mean it like that. It wouldn't have gone that long if not for the smell giving away its location
Yeah, yeah.
under one of our seats of our car. So yeah, I appreciate that for
that
sure.
that
Built into
reminds me, to
gourds.
speak of Jessica again. I remember they were growing like birdhouse gourds at one time, and when she got, I think whether she got a new car or something, they hadn't grown them in at least a year, and she reaches underneath the seat in her car, and there's a perfectly like hollowed out beautiful birdhouse gourd that was not dry before it went under there.
Mm.
And she was like, "Oh, hello. This has been here a while."
You can
So
either do
Perfect
sun
growing
dried or
condition.
shade rotted.
Yeah. Take your pick. Take your pick.
so yes, we're talking about the cucurbit family, which, if you're not familiar, as you just heard, is very broad, from edible to something
Decorative.
useful
Yeah.
on the skin or in the kitchen, and also just cute little things you can put on your porch steps.
Oh, it puts the gremlin on the porch step and
They're
gets
Yeah.
gets the hose
aggressively
again.
cute things. So, aggressively cute is like how I roll.
Seems
But
like if you have one of those gremlin gourds, you have a million of them. Is that the case, Alexis?
yeah, it's
They're highly
amazing.
productive.
It's
Yeah. Okay.
amazing.
Not that I want to
You
Do you
only
water
need
them
like 3
after?
plants.
Do you
to
water them
encourage
after
you more.
midnight or
You can
do you
water them whenever you can't get water on
fertigate
them,
them
and you
after? Yeah,
can't
don't
fertilize them.
fertilize them after midnight.
Oh, nice. Yeah, you can't fertilize them. Yeah.
But so we're talking about the cucurbit family, and the beautiful thing about we talk about families. If you've listened to any of our episodes talking about rotation and how important it is, we talk about rotating by family, and that is because a lot of the same issues happen within a family, as is life in general. So whether you're growing loofah or zucchini or watermelon, a lot of those same diseases and insects are going to affect it. But also that means the same cultural practices, which can, whether you want to grow something new that you've not grown before, a lot of those same things apply. So it can make it a little bit easier to grow a different crop if it's in the same family. So there's two sides of the coin there to look at it. But just
And
wanted
so
to give you
rotating by family, we just mean not to grow
Mhm.
two things from the same family in the same area back to back.
Like
Mhm.
cucumbers and squash would be too
Yeah.
closely related because they have similar insects and disease problems.
And so
Right.
and so the rotating out would be something
Yeah.
from a different family, like the one that tomatoes are in, or the bean family or something like that. Yeah, I think
Mhm.
that once that clicked for me,
Mhm.
everything else was like it was much easier to understand.
And
But
that's
even the needs of the
can be
things are
tough.
not
Right.
terribly
Yeah.
different from each
Yeah.
other too.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, talking about those, I usually like to talk about like some cultural practices a little bit about growing those, just because I
Really
think
important. Yeah.
whether you're growing on a small home garden scale or commercial scale, and really doesn't matter what you're growing, some basic cultural practices can get you really far without having to do a ton, as far as treating for things. We always say kind of prevent an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure type situation. So with cucurbits, they tend, in at least Kentucky, because we're so humid here, they get a lot of disease pressure here. They get a lot of insect pressure too, but talking about diseases, so one way I tell people is, if you have the luxury of space, which not all of us have, but if you have the luxury of space, spreading things out a little bit more so that they dry. We talked about that before, like
Mhm.
just like we've talked about pruning tactics before. It's the same kind of concept, and that can really cut down on a lot of your mildews. If you do spray, it makes them more effective, and you just can get down in there into the canopy a lot better.
Yeah, and you mentioned sprays. One thing, and it's going to be a recurring theme over. We're talking about maybe doing a individual crop sort of podcast series sprinkled throughout the episodes. But one common theme that you're going to see us talk about is a lot of the garden chemicals and just fungicides and disease control methods in general, they are not curative. They will
Mm-hmm.
not cure a plant once disease is established. So it's important to remember on cucurbits and all other garden crops for that matter, is that they some of them do a pretty good job at preventing disease spread, but they do not cure diseases. So that's something to keep in mind, and it's super important with all of your vine crops, because Alexis already mentioned the relative humidity at ground level tends to be really high. These are things, if you think about a summer squash, they have a large canopy, they shade themselves very nicely, but that leads to foliage that's wet for a long period of time. They tend to, during the wet season, get a lot of diseases, or they have a high potential for
Mm-hmm.
diseases. So just remember that if you call your local extension office, they're probably going to tell you that a lot of the disease controls, number one, is cultural things like spacing, space them out, let the sunlight in, let it dry. But the second thing we're going to talk to you about is products, whether it's chlorthalonil, copper, mancozeb, any of those common fungicides that we will talk about with homeowners. All of those are they're not curative; they're preventative. So just
Mm-hmm.
keep that in mind. It's a big theme in cucurbits as well as other garden crops like tomatoes. Very,
Yeah.
very important to remember that the cucurbits in general are just kind of a really warm season crop. When I think about this whole classification of plants, we talk a lot about something like a snap bean. A lot of times you can get by with putting that in the ground at 50 degrees
Mm-hmm.
and do okay. But if you try doing that with a cucurbit, either transplant or seed, the seed's going to rot and the transplant is not going to like it. You're looking at more of a 70-degree temperature at 2 inches depth. So it's a 20-degree warmer soil temperature. It's pretty incredible with cucurbits. And when I think about giving those a good start, it's planting those first and foremost into warm garden soil.
They like
Getting
it
those
hot.
all start. Yes, they absolutely do. And, of course, that impacts diseases and everything later in the season. But yeah, that whole class of chemical, or not chemicals, this whole group of plants
Practices.
that we're talking about
Oh,
today.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Warm
Speaking
well, I
of
weather
think
kind
plants.
right.
go
You go
ahead.
ahead, Josh.
Oh, I was going to say, speaking of kind of cultural practices, something I've only ever seen in pictures um, is people creating like kind of higher trellising systems of
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
cucumbers. I've never done that personally, but have y'all ever seen that in person, done it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I remember you did something with your master's work, right? Alexis, that was like
Mm-hmm.
greenhouse, right?
Yeah, I did greenhouse hydroponic cucumber production.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
that
so
was
like they're hanging, right?
yeah. So like you can grow in tunnels or greenhouses if you're doing like winter production and want to, get squash of some kind. So we did English cucumbers and dropped string. So very similar if you've ever seen tomatoes grown on this type of system. You drop string from the rafters basically,
Mm-hmm.
and usually drop a single string down to one plant, and then you
Yeah.
clip that plant up the string. And so you don't have to get down on the ground to harvest. It keeps the fruit a lot cleaner. And you can get, if you do spray, which again, you are going to spray whether you're organic or not in Kentucky, if you want,
Mm-hmm.
if you want that plant to survive, which that's a whole other thing I can talk about. But to get survive for a long time, to get chemicals in there. So because your canopy's up and down, it's a lot easier
Mm-hmm.
to get in there and to see stuff. So, uh,
Cucumbers are so much more well formed when they're hanging.
Mm-hmm.
mhm,
They're so much more perfect. I mean, in shape, it's
mhm.
crazy. It's
Yeah, they don't,
crazy.
raw. A lot of times we get people who
Mm-hmm.
will bring in squash or cucumbers that, have a rotten spot on them. And sometimes that's just from sitting on the wet ground. If it's rained for a week, there's really
Right.
not nothing you can do about it. You can put some straw under them, but, sometimes it's a little bit too late in some cases. The reason I say if you want that plant to survive is because I think that people forget sometimes that these to use the days to maturity of a crop to their advantage. So with some crops, like a pumpkin as an example, you're going to plant that a little bit later in the season. You're probably going to plant that in around June if you want that for, your late September, early October sales, so to speak. But
Mm-hmm.
that, it takes all that time to get to a big product. But something like zucchini or summer squash is a pretty short window, so you can plant more than once. And so I always encourage people, plant, around Derby Day or whenever your last frost free day is, when your soil temperatures are warm, like Ray said, and then do another set a month or a month and a half later. And by the time that first plant's kind of dying out, just because you didn't want to deal with it, you didn't want to spray it, I get that. then your second one's coming on. And as long as you're kind of maybe having them separated a little bit so that they're not infecting each other, you don't really have to do anything. And then that'll get you through the season. So seed's cheap
Right.
enough, in my opinion, that that's an easy thing to do. But
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in general with a reduced sprays, or with a lot of some of these plants, you're fighting an uphill battle, and so the idea of planning for reinforcements throughout the course of the
Right.
season is kind of part of the strategy that people will have.
And a big strategy, more so than with just about any garden crop, and I see it year in and year out, is this concept of vectors. When you have something like a cucumber beetle, which is there just about every year, there's some other insect problems, but I'll pick on the
the
cucumber beetle.
evil.
They transmit all of these diseases. They're a vector. They kind of spread diseases from one point to another. So you're like, well, I'm trying to control diseases, not insects. Well, you're really trying to control one that will help in the control of the other. So that's an important thing to note. So then you're going to have those problems year in and year out. It seems like in cucurbits especially. And now, some folks, you just may have acceptable losses, and that's fine. If you're a commercial producer, you may be on some sort of spray schedule, a 7 to 14 day spray schedule for those things. It just depends on really what your objective is, but just kind of be aware that, when we're talking about diseases, a lot of times we're talking about insects too, especially with these vine crops. The two have a really heavy interaction with one another.
And you'll know if you've had usually it's like bacterial wilt is the main one that we see that's vectored in cucurbits. And it's bacteria, it plugs up the vascular system and it gets in there by the feeding of cucumber beetles. And so if you've ever grown anything in the cucurbit family, and even if you water it every day, maybe it's rained for a week, the soil's plenty damp, but the plant still looks wilted, that's most likely bacterial wilt.
It's so crazy and so defeating, and it's
It
just
is.
it is like
crushed
we are not in control here.
Yeah.
Like it is a crazy
humbling,
experience.
Brett. It is. It's very humbling
To watch your plant like melt into the ground, and it's quick too.
And
It's
the
not.
leaves
It's
look
not.
good. The leaves look good. The plant looks good, nice dark and green, but you'll just see a wilting collapse, and you throw more water at it, and that doesn't help. Yeah.
Those vascular systems are just plugged up with bacteria, so they're not moving water. So it's wilting because it's not getting water. It's wild, but yeah. So that's, if anybody somebody hopefully had a sigh of relief of like they're not the worst gardener ever by their plant just melting.
Yeah,
we've all been there.
Do you ever
home
do
gardeners,
the confirmation of like kind of cutting and then pulling apart to see the little like bacterial
streaming
drool?
Yeah, if you're
Drool.
if you're adept at that, you can kind of see that if it's advanced, or you can do the water method. If you're used to looking for that and have a clear glass, you can see the vascular streaming in water. Sometimes it doesn't always work, but I usually have a clean knife blade where I'll put it up against the stem, and you'll see that gummy streaming, and that's a sure sign. There's lots of good websites that Extension has, or lots of good YouTube videos that Extension has that shows that, and home gardeners can easily do that test at home. If you see these symptoms of collapse, even though it has sufficient water, yeah, Josh, that's a great kind of at-home thing you can do to sort of diagnose.
Once you're to that point, like once you're infected, it's over. Like that's why, go ahead and plant another one. So if it's early enough in the season, which is what do you think, Ray? Like probably July, you could still get away with,
it depends,
at least in the central area of the state.
Yeah, you could look at your days to maturity, which varies a lot from let's say a vining cucumber versus a Space Master. That's like 20 some days difference. So then if I have a failure, or I'm trying to plant my second round of summer squash and try to avoid squash vine borer, which is the bane of my existence in my own garden. If I'm trying to dodge some of those, emergence of some of those insects or the primary infestation windows, if I'm doing a late planting, pay real close attention to days to maturity. That becomes very important. But things like summer squash, you can get a second planting. Cucumbers, you can get a second planting if you pick those varieties that are shorter days to maturity. Yeah,
Fun.
sure thing.
Or if you want to grow little gremlin gourds.
Yeah, the gremlin gourd. How many days? Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Did you guys figure out how many days to maturity? I may try some gremlin gourds.
70 to 80.
I've never looked. Are they kind of the standard?
I just started mine, so
yeah.
But yeah, I think they're kind of like a June planting because they're
Okay.
fall, right? Like just like a
Gotcha.
pumpkin. So
Yeah, kind of ready at that right time.
yeah,
Mhm.
I never
It
know
says
where I'm gonna put them either, but
I've
find
on
space.
On Johnny's they say 95 days for their gremlins.
95. Okay.
Wow, dang.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's pretty amazing when you're talking about a 50-day zucchini versus a
Mm-hmm.
90-day, and it's in the same general grouping of plants, but it's a double I mean, it's twice as long to
Mm-hmm.
maturity for some of these, like that
Well, yeah, it makes
ornamental
me think
gourd.
of like winter squash because the skin's so thick. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
Kabocha.
yeah.
Mhm.
I feel like the first time I had that was at Brett's house, actually. Didn't you all have like a bunch of kabocha squashes one time?
Yeah.
And he didn't want to
We've
admit
been
that. He kind of didn't want
Yeah,
to
that's
admit
something we
that.
do.
He was like,
He's like,
we've been
yeah, we
known to trade
did.
in winter squash from time to
Yeah.
time.
Barter. Are you on the barter system for cucurbits, Brett? I mean,
Yeah,
is there something I need to
we
know?
were growing a bunch of butternuts for a couple
Mm.
years, but yeah, we had a bunch of other stuff too.
Mhm.
Some of the otter, the blue Hubbard,
mm-hmm.
Like a
and
The blue
dinosaur.
Hubbard's my trap crop. That's the one I
Those are
grow as
so
a trap
cool.
crop. This is a blue Hubbard squash.
yeah.
Yeah.
Ray's referencing the trap crop phenomenon where you plant something that bugs will walk over a cucumber to go
Yes.
and eat blue Hubbard
I
squash.
love blue Hubbard squash. Yeah. Did you
Yeah.
net those or anything, Brett, or have to do anything special in Lexington? Some people don't. Yeah.
No, we didn't. We've only had
Mhm.
1 year. We've only had 1 year where we had like squash vine borer as a
Yeah.
major issue in our butternuts, and other than that, we haven't had major issues. In at least in my garden space, my experiences with bacterial wilt were actually at the South Farm on research
Mhm.
plots and stuff. But yeah, I was a little nervous about doing it. I was like, oh, let's bring in a bunch of pests to like draw them in. If they're not here yet, let's send up
We want them. We
the
want them.
flare. But luckily, we didn't have too
Dinner's
much
done.
This whole group of plants is, I mean, you mentioned South Farm that we're talking about today. Once again, more than any other garden crop, it's so weather dependent. Some years they'll do the same thing during a wet year and do the same thing during a dry year. In a wet year, you're just going to have all of these mildews and
Mhm.
disease problems. And for homeowners to properly spray, like apply fungicides, if they're of a mindset that they want to spray for diseases, it is very difficult without the proper spray equipment to get these cover sprays on at the right interval. So frequency and the proper amount of active ingredient, all that. But in a dry year, you just magically have these beautiful crops. And the only difference is like the weather more than anything, even more than tomatoes. I think about these vining crops
Mhm.
is that some years, despite your best effort, you're just going to get hit really, really hard with diseases with this crop. And I get probably just about as many calls out of this group of plant as I do any other garden plants during a wet season. I just brace myself for all the vine crop questions.
It
Well,
feels like
what can I do? What can I do?
everything with cucurbits feels like it happens like fast.
Yeah.
Yes,
You know,
it
they
feels
grow
that way.
fast, they go down fast. They you'll look at a fruit, and then
Live
it seems
fast,
like
die hard, man. That's what we do.
exactly. I don't know if that's because
You
they're
say
moving a
dry
lot of
hard
water.
or
They're
die hard?
dry hard.
Live fast, die hard.
That's
Yeah.
the
That's the
gourd motto.
gourds.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there
totally.
you go. I like it.
Once
Gremlin
again, I
gourd.
need a
That's the
shirt.
title. That's the title. Cucurbit.
Live fast, die
Live fast,
hard.
die hard.
That's the gourd growers need that. We need to be writing this down. I hope somebody is
There's a
cataloging.
whole magazine just about gourds, like a monthly magazine about
Mhm.
gourds.
Published by Alexis from her house.
Yeah.
If
From the
only.
front porch.
If only.
Yeah.
No, someone else told me about that. She used to be a big gourd person, so got me on the train to live in
Yeah.
the gourd life.
The gourd life.
One of the things about cucumbers in particular, but you know, cucurbits in general, you know what, when you plant tomatoes, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, if you plant a tomato plant deeper than where the stem is, deeper than the soil line, there are those little hairs on the
Mm,
stem that will
adventitious fruit.
turn to
Yep.
root. You do not want to do that with a cucumber plant.
No, and in fact, I don't know. In this group of, it scares me to try to transplant, or I'm intimidated by trying to transplant like cucurbits overall because they are so delicate. And the only way that I recommend, usually for homeowners, if they're going to grow transplants, is to put them in peat pots where the entire pot goes
Mm.
into the ground. Because even the process of trying to take that thing out of a plastic package, if you've grown it in a container, can destroy the roots. But yeah, Brett, the proper depth is really important, but they're also just in general super delicate. So think about that if you're
Ray, you
wanting to
just gave me a
start.
complex because I don't. I'm
I
the
didn't think
worst.
about it at
Do
all
you
until you just said
abuse
that.
your
Never thought
cucurbit?
about it at all.
Oh,
I'm
it
so rough. The only plants I'm
yeah.
careful with are milkweed. Like I'm like, pfft, throw
Oh,
it in the
I'm not
ground.
even
these are
careful with
worse than
those.
me.
What are you?
Why milkweed? That's oddly specific, Alexis.
Oh,
The
Yeah.
milkweed
only
because
plants I don't abuse are
they do
milkweed.
not like their roots to be messed with at
Well, that
all.
is cucurbits. I mean,
Don't
that's
breathe
just
too hard on
squash and
them.
zucchini. They'll just break off. They
Maybe
look at you
you
and fall
just
apart.
don't do it right.
Maybe I'm
Ray's
just
just
violent.
Ray's just got too his hands
I
are
have
just
a
too powerful. You know, it's
I
like
was
big,
like,
the
I have tiny
strong
baby hands, so
hands.
maybe
like the
Yeah.
that's
robot
it.
that's
Like a
that it can't hold
never-ending
the egg in
story.
his hand without squashing it.
The
Right.
vampire in
That's
him is
right.
like, I can't be delicate.
Well,
That's
but Ray,
right.
I remember a couple, I don't know how many episodes ago, we were talking about like the concept of the raised bed,
Mhm.
and that the raised
Yeah.
bed doesn't mean that you build a little, doesn't have to mean that you build a little
No.
wood structure and fill it up with whatever soil, but that your family and lots of other families too would grow, I think, cucumbers and
Sure.
other, maybe other cucurbits in a sort of raised bed
Yeah.
kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's for a couple different reasons, and we sort of touch bases on those here today as well as the other day on the other podcast is soil temperature, which, needs to be very warm, much warmer than the average 50. It needs to be more closely aligned with like 70 degrees. So if you mound up soil into a flat topped bed 2 to 3 inches above soil level, you rake up basically a pile of dirt and then flatten that 24 inches or so across the top. You have your old fashioned raised bed in the garden of soil, nothing else, just a raised mound, flat top of soil. That increases the temperature a little quicker because some of
Mm.
these things, remember, a long season. You can plant quicker. And also, cucurbits in general are very susceptible to root rots. So
Mm.
you want fast germination and you want good drainage. And that's kind
Mhm.
of inverse to the thinking about water because these things also need a lot of water, but they're also susceptible to root rot. So what that
God,
means is
so
good
needy.
drainage. Good drainage. Yeah, they are kind of needy, Alexis, sort of. But if you have a heavy clay soil, a lot of times you'll get a lot of those root rots or collar rots, and they'll rot at soil level or root level. But yeah, that's a couple of the reasons why you would do that, Brett. And it's, in fact, my cucumbers are in the garden right now, growing on little raised mounds, and they germinated a little quicker. They were mounded up, the soil warmed up
Cute.
nicely, and yeah, yeah,
Do you
just kind of
ever
rake up a
do
mound of
you
dirt.
ever do any of the Three Sisters kind of cucurbits? One of the Three Sisters, right?
Mhm.
Used to do that, but I we had one commercial patch of corn and beans, and I grew to absolutely loathe white half runner beans, which don't vine quite as much as full trellising beans, but they grow up the corn far enough to that if you've ever had to go pick sweet corn and beans at the same time, you will never do it again. It's hot, it's sticky, it's uncomfortable, and
Mm.
you have all these things meshed together, but you did take advantage of the Three Sisters methods of planting and taking advantage of, space and,
Mhm.
sunlight penetration, all these other things. Yeah. Yeah, we
My
used to do that.
question was always when you do go to harvest the corn and beans, and like beans, you're harvesting usually over time, corn not so much, but I feel like you're stepping on your cucurbit. And that would be maybe I just like
Maybe you're
am a
right.
bull in a china shop or something, but like I feel like you step on the vines to get there, so that was always my like frustration with
Mm.
that system. But also I am not an indigenous person who came up with these great ideas, and so I'm sure
Yeah.
they did it better than we have. So
I do like the fact that they shade themselves and they really
Mhm.
outcompete weeds at a point in the season. I mean,
That's true.
weeds, if you do shallow cultivation 2 to 3 times in a home garden, that's about all you're going to have to do. Once again, really shallow is the key there. Suppress the weeds, knock back the weeds for the first couple of emergent cycles of weeds. And then most of these things are going to shade themselves well enough to where they're going to outcompete weeds and it's not going to be a problem.
Yeah,
And that's
I
one of the
generally
things about
find
cucurbits.
the stepping on it is a problem with cucurbits.
Yeah, a lot of
Cucurbits
those
are
roots.
not my favorite. I
In
love winter
general.
squash, and I'll grow them, but in part because I can grow it and I don't really have to go through there until after
The
the
vines
stuff's
are dying
mature.
back.
Like
Yeah.
compared to cucumbers, where you're going in and
Yeah.
harvesting, every 2 or
Hmm.
3 days for a however long period. Man,
Yeah.
it
I think there's
stresses me
something.
out. So I relate to what you're saying, Alexis. But
Mhm.
yeah, I don't
That
know.
trellising, like Josh brought up
Yeah.
earlier.
When I see those pictures, especially at like kind of commercial scale, I think the first one I ever saw was like some location in like East Asia or whatever. I was like,
Hmm.
that seems like that's the way,
Yeah.
you
Of
know,
what, Josh? What did you
of
see
growing
as
like
far as those systems?
like
Trellising, like
cucumbers up
cucumbers.
on
Cucumber?
trellises, like these
Gotcha.
kind of structures. I couldn't. It's a it's a photo, so I couldn't quite investigate how it was
Mhm.
constructed. But like the
Mhm.
person could just walk through, and it's like
They're
pretty
It's
just
kind of
hanging
chill
like,
to
down.
do
harvest.
you want to put the money into the labor of trellising or the labor of harvesting? So, like, because it's easy, I would,
Trellising.
right. Like, as someone who both picked and trellised for a lot of English cucumbers for months, I mean, it's like the work in trellising can be really annoying, but when it's so much faster and easier to harvest because you're not, bending over and you're stepping on your
Right.
And
product.
it's a great option for folks that don't have a lot of space, but yeah, they
Hmm.
want a vining type like cucumber, for instance. I like the fact that you can go vertical with stuff like that,
Hmm.
and you can
Mhm.
take advantage of capturing more sunlight, which generally means more fruit production, more
You can have
bloom.
a pretty arbor that's
Yes,
covered in
Yeah.
cucumbers or little
look really
baby one.
nice.
The one thing is if you grow something that's going to be a heavier crop, like a melon, like a larger
Needs
melon or a
support.
pumpkin or something, it needs some support. So
Yeah.
that's cucumbers and like loofahs are great. They usually do fine, but anything too much larger, they're going to need support. I've seen people use like for their melons like pantyhose, and they'll put the fruit
Oh,
in the
Yeah.
nice.
pantyhose
That's
and then
pretty
like
cool.
tie it up onto the trellis, so it's
Yeah.
just got a little bit of support there on it. But of course, that's more of a home garden scale, but it's cute. It's
You know,
fun.
going back to insects, they're a big problem in cucurbits. We've already kind of talked a little bit about that. Do any of you guys have any experiences with any of the row covers in vining crops as far as excluding the bad insects? We want the pollinators. Any of you guys have any experience with using row covers to sort of, guard against things like squash vine borer, cucumber beetles, all the bad guys? Although the guys that
Yes.
want to do bad. Okay.
Short
Yeah.
answer,
I
yes.
mean,
And
on a
so
commercial
it's
scale, Brad, or
yeah, I would say simulating a
yeah,
commercial scale.
yeah.
Yeah. So there's actually an interesting project that's been going on out at the South Farm for as long as
Katie.
for a while back.
Mhm.
Mark Williams and Tim Woods, and now Dr. Dave Gonthier, working with this stuff called it's a type of netting. It's like an insect exclusion netting, which is more air permeable than row cover. But before that, the OG was a form of row cover in the same vein as what we've talked about for frost protection, but it's much thinner.
Mhm.
And the general idea is very straightforward, which is in order for a bug to hurt your plant, it has to be able to get to your plant. And so
Yes.
you construct a tent over your plant that doesn't allow it in during key windows. And you're just excluding, and that can it can be really impactful for certified organic systems that many
Mhm.
times don't have good controls for things like cucumber beetles or squash vine borer, or anyone who's just interested in reducing sprays and reducing times, engaging in the field. And there's an interesting interplay there between the potential outlawing or discontinuation of some of the neonicotinoid products in the industry, things that are sometimes discussed in terms of their relationship to honeybee populations. And so what if we, long story short, that stuff is horticulturally at least magical. It's like a crazy thing. You spray the base of the plant with this thing and whatever bites it will die.
Or put
It
it in the
is,
water and it goes into the
yeah,
soil.
you
Yeah, it's
soil
great.
drench it at transplant and the thing has like a bulletproof vest on. Now,
Yeah.
there are implications in science and all kinds of other things that we can discuss on the back end, but I can say on the side of just growing it simply, It's pretty straightforward. But so this is an example of a societal issue impacting this and involved here. And so I think there was a lot of interest in that bug exclusion netting and
Absolutely.
other things in anticipation that maybe our main defense is going to be no longer offered or available for use. And so the main thing is you put it on, you protect it. Sometimes then you take it off to let bees and other pollinators in to pollinate the crop, because that's one thing is if you exclude the cucumber beetles, you're also excluding the bees. And then back on, there's also been treatments and things where they will actually have a honeybee, I'm sorry, a bumblebee box inside the actual tunnel, etc. But I mean, the efficacy can be quite we had success growing stuff like that. It
I
makes
love that
it
for homeowners because they're dealing with smaller spaces, and we already talked about it that it's really difficult to get a good effective spray into the canopy of some of these crops with home equipment like a backpack spray. It's really tough to get the pressure and the particle size to get the spray rolling underneath the canopy. But with the netting, you're just providing a physical barrier, and there's no resistance. We talk about chemical resistance all the time. There's no resistance to the barrier. I mean, insect, it's a physical barrier. But I'm really interested in that, and I recommend that a lot and talk a lot with homeowners. I have some homeowners using that, and now that they've got their timing down, they make almost no sprays by using those products. And it's just a small homeowner scale, but it's amazing the results that they're seeing with some of those garden covers. But the main thing, as you mentioned, is just letting your pollinators in late in the season. Yes, some of the guys are going to be around like cucumber beetles that is going to cause issues, but the issues will crop up, no pun intended, so late. They will accumulate so late in the season, it doesn't hurt you the same way that getting diseases established early does. I think it's really cool. These row covers are one of the greatest things you could think about when you have vine crops and things at home, and how to properly use those. And what did you guys just make sure that the edges and everything were pinned down or sealed real
Yeah,
good?
you got to tuck it all in. Either use bags of gravel or some way of anchoring even along the edge, because where the whole goal here is to keep the bugs out. And so if you do all this rigmarole and then you leave the end open, well,
Yeah.
there's going to be some traffic on the exit ramp to get into the thing, but they're still going to get in and spread that disease or
Yeah.
cause whatever issues. Yeah, and I think there are definitely extension publications and other things out there about how to use those types of approaches, but it's a really cool example of that integrated pest management thing we've talked about before, of using this physical exclusionary control. It's sort of the technological equivalent of picking a bug off the plant, right? You're
Yeah.
physically keeping it from getting there.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, and
not as satisfying, but
it's not. No, you don't get to feel the little, them bouncing off
Put
like you
Japanese
do when you
beetles on
watch
toothpicks, Alexis, the impaler.
yeah.
or bean beetles, and you have a rock. Squash.
It's hard to build up a biological resistance to a
It's a
rock,
squash.
Alexis. I agree. Squash
Well,
bug. Everything is a squash bug to you because you squash them all.
before we wind down, I wanted to share. So there was this one cucurbit, the cucurbit that got away. No, it wasn't the one that got away. It was. I went to a seed swap here in Kentucky. I don't know. When I get the feeling that it was 5 years ago, it was probably 10 years ago.
It was last week.
Yes.
Pre-COVID, post-COVID, there's only 2 times.
It was pre-COVID for sure.
Pre-COVID.
And
Wow.
they had this thing there, and things that have absurd names, I can't walk away from. I can't say. And this person was selling this thing
gourds.
called a plum granny.
Whoa.
Googling as we
Plum
speak.
granny, sometimes called Queen Anne's pocket melon.
Oh.
So it is a very odd. I was like, "What is this?" And they're like, "Oh, it's a plum granny." And I was
It's
like,
so
"What?"
cute.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So they are fragrant. They like the melon itself kind of smells. It wasn't as fragrant. I don't know. The ones I grew weren't as fragrant as I was expecting them to be. Technically, they're
No.
edible, but like the whole vibe was that allegedly ladies in Queen Anne era England would carry them in their pockets as a sort of botanical deodorant / perfume kind of thing.
My grandmother always grew those, and I don't never remember them having a good smell for some reason. Little round, like the little softball or little baseball look, very pretty, but I don't
Yeah.
think she ever did
They
anything with them. But how did you run onto those? Did you say, Brett?
at a
I
I
hadn't
was at a
heard that
seed
word
seed
in a long
swap.
time.
I was
Seed
at a
swap.
seed swap in Pikeville,
Yeah, well, that would
and
make sense. Yeah.
somebody had them, and they didn't. I don't know if it was toward the end of the day or something. And I came up and I was like, "What is this?" And they were like, "You idiot! They're plum grannies." I was like,
Right. They look
sorry,
Oh,
really
I
similar. They look similar in kind of morphology, definitely not color, to like lemon cucumbers, just like
yeah.
another air.
Yeah,
definitely
that's kind of what they
definitely.
are. And
These
there's a
are
long-standing
muskmelons.
tradition in the East to grow those, and I'm not for sure why
That's what
people
I was
grow
trying to
those.
get at. I was
But
like,
they're in a
"What
lot
is
of
the
home
point of
gardens.
this?"
There's a lot of those in home gardens.
And I yeah, apparently allegedly the fruit smell really nice. The ones that I grew did
Mm,
not, but I mean it didn't smell bad.
mm-mm.
It was just like it would be like carrying a
Wet
small
cucumber in your pocket.
cucumber around. Like, oh, check this out. It smells delicious. It's like, well, I mean, I
Yeah, it says
guess, but
Southern Exposure has
Uh-huh.
them, and it lists so fragrant 2 or 3 can make a whole room smell like melons.
there you
Mm,
go.
So 2 or 3
I
hundred, maybe. I don't.
never
But it says,
experienced it.
Maybe I
however,
must have
taste
not let
is
them.
bland.
Maybe I was
Yeah, they
using
did
them
not
wrong.
taste good. They tasted you, Josh. You were
They're
talking about
all seed
crossing a melon with a cucumber, and it's
with
like
a
a
bad
melon
idea.
flavored or a
Yeah,
cucumber
right.
flavored melon.
That's
It was
it.
kind of like
Must
that.
yeah, it's kind of like
Yeah.
that.
Huh.
That's a good
And
analogy for that, actually.
they that year the plants went downhill too quickly, I think, and maybe they didn't ripen to the full effect that they would have had
Hmm
as a pocket melon.
As a
Mhm.
pocket
Yeah,
melon.
because I think that was somebody was like, "Oh, it's a plum granny," and I was like, "I don't know what that is." They're like, "Oh, like a pocket melon." I'm like,
Yeah.
we're
You're
getting
like,
far
are
Right.
you
from
Pocket
You're
are
moving
melon.
in
you
the
from what
wrong
messing
you're
with
talking
me?
direction.
You
about.
know.
Are you messing with me? Yeah, yeah. No, I
They
remember
used to do
those.
that with like citrus and like cloves and stuff, right? They would
That
have that
makes
like
more
in a
sense to me.
little pouch. But I think that was also like they would pull it out and smell it to in crowds for sickness because they thought that
Mm.
Yeah,
they
yeah,
had
right.
this. But I think
Mm.
it was also because people
The
didn't smell
miasma.
great in crowds, so that was a way
Mm.
to kind of get
Yeah.
through that. But anyways, apparently you could also do it with melons. Fun fact.
Pocket. That's just a Queen Anne's pocket melon.
Hmm.
So does that mean
No
We
you
call
big
that
you
a
deal.
smelled
woo-wee.
Yeah.
you smelled in the winter though for sure because no melons, no
Yeah, but
pocket
less
melons.
sweaty, less hot, more
True, true.
bundled,
Okay,
keeping it
all right.
Yes.
in.
You're accumulating the aroma in a
Yeah,
good
you're
way.
marinate. Yeah, it's off season. It's like a
I
cicada. It's down below.
think the marinade took a turn. Yeah. The pocket melon. But
Mm.
yeah.
Bundled all up in there. Awesome. Well, that sounds great. Welcome to Cucurbits if you've not cucurbited before. So we
For
hope you
those
learned
about to
something new.
cucurbit, we salute you.
If you learned about loofahs or pocket melons, or if maybe your granny grew pocket melons and you want to diss us publicly, you can do that by leaving us a review and dissing all of us except for Ray because we didn't know about pocket melons. Or you
I still don't
can
know what they're used for. So
you
I feel like
you
I platformed plum grannies, so I shouldn't get attacked, but you two definitely should.
Well, I
oh
think it's, sometimes you want a melon, but you can't fit it in your pocket. Boom.
pocket
Not the
melon.
plum granny. You're right. You're right in the right zone.
they
I
have their
think that's such a
uses.
cute little name. Like I want to name a dog that or something like a cute little dog plum
I haven't
Plum
granny.
heard that
granny.
word. I'm so happy you brought that up. I had not heard that term in years.
Deep memory.
Yeah, it was. It unlocked.
Unlocked.
I could basically kind of taste that. You know how you have 3D memories. That unlocked a 3D memory. Yeah,
Wow,
yeah, it
Nice.
that's
really did.
awesome.
I
From the
hadn't heard that term
1910s.
in so many. Yes, the 30s. Thank you. Maybe the 20s. I don't remember. But yeah, that's awesome. Glad you brought it
That's
up.
so cool.
Yeah, it is.
Well, if you want to tell us more about your experience with plum grannies, you can do that. You can shoot us an email, which is in the show notes. You can follow us on Instagram and shoot us a message on there at Hort Culture Podcast. You can leave us a review telling us all your fun things or criticizing Josh and I guess, about
Mhm.
plum grannies and our lack of Appalachian knowledge. Forgive us, we're getting there. But we thank you all for being here with us today. We hope you learned something new. And we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and that you will join us next time. Have a great one.